I'm a detective, but not like the ones you see on TV and in the movies. I'm more of a private detective. By that I mean I don't get involved in any murder cases or anything like that. Most people hire me for family affairs. I get a lot of work from investigating cheating accusations, to locate missing or stolen pets, and I am sometimes asked to gather evidence of bullying at schools as well. I had a call one afternoon last summer, and I've told some of my friends about this experience, and they have encouraged me to share it here. It's the strangest and frankly most disgusting case I've ever handled. So I got a call. The client was a woman in her 30s. She made arrangements to meet me in person, to speak to me about her request. I was taken aback by her beauty when I first laid eyes on her. She was a very, very talkative woman. It was as if her tongue was afraid of the dark. She was very warm and open. She had come to ask me to find out if her husband was having an affair. I thought to myself, now, who the hell would want to cheat on you, hey? She had grown suspicious of her husband when he started coming home later and later from work. She guessed that he was meeting up with someone, based on how shifty he had been acting whenever she asked him where he had been. She thought that he had been cheating on her for about a month. I took the job and told her that I would trail him when he finished work. I got his work address and waited in my car until I saw him leave. I was really hoping that this guy was just trying to put in a few extra hours for his wife and potentially their future, but as in most cases in my line of work, I was wrong. The husband left work at about 6 p.m. and his wife told me that he had been coming home no earlier than 10 p.m. So clearly he was up to something in those 4 hours, and I was going to find out what that was. He got in his car, and I tailed him. We drove for quite a while. We left the city area and headed out into the suburbs. I thought to myself, he might have met a woman in the city who lived on the outskirts, and to avoid their affair being discovered, he always met her in the outskirts, and never in the city. My theory went out of the window when we drove right through the suburbs and into the countryside. Now, this wasn't what I was expecting at all. I was quite surprised at this point. There wasn't really much out where we were heading, nothing but a few houses and a couple of abandoned buildings. He led me to the most unexpected place, an abandoned love hotel. He parked up, and I turned off, not to raise his suspicions. I planned on looping back round to covertly see what he was getting up to. While doing this, I did a search on the abandoned love hotel. Apparently, it went under due to poor management and debts. Last activities I found online, in terms of opening hours, were more than 10 years ago. So what the hell was he doing out there? If the hotel was open, then that would be fine, I guess. Love hotels are kind of self-explanatory, you know? You rent a room for a certain period of time, and you get intimate in that room. It's pretty straightforward. The thing about love hotels is that some of them are so out there and unusual, they offer all kinds of fulfillments of fantasies. If you want to do it in a themed room like a medieval Game of Thrones kind of scenario, then there's a hotel for that. This particular hotel was catered to fantasies. I could tell just by some of the reviews I read. It seemed as if nothing was off the table. That said, it was still abandoned, so what was he doing there? I had to pull in and see for myself. I had a job to do. I had to observe and report. I saw his car. He wasn't in it, so I headed into the abandoned love hotel. I cautiously walked into the lobby, trying my best to avoid all the debris on the floor. It didn't take me long to locate which room he was in. I heard strange noises coming from upstairs. A male voice was murmuring, so I followed the sound of those murmurs. I arrived at the room, and I could see and hear what was going on through a gap in the door. The guy had left it ajar, so I peeked inside. What I heard and saw rendered me speechless. "Oh, look at you. You're so beautiful. You're so lovely and quiet. It's nice and quiet." The husband was speaking to a naked woman who was lying on the dusty bedspread. I looked closer and realized something. Hang on, that's not a woman. That's a love doll. a doll made solely for the fulfillment of pleasures. The husband began to take off his suit jacket and started loosening his tie. I was almost certain what was about to come next. I couldn't bear watching that. I was very confused and conflicted. I had to report this to the client, and I knew that it was going to be very difficult and likely distressing for the wife. Her reaction and her feelings towards what happened will remain confidential. All I will say is that my predictions were right. It was incredibly distressing. I don't know anything about how he explained himself or what motive was behind him doing that, but I have thought about it. I thought that he must have brought that doll to the abandoned love hotel so that he could enjoy himself in peace. When I told one of my friends this story, she's into creepy online stories, so you can thank her for me sharing this with you. When I told her about this, she said the following: "Are you sure the husband wasn't being called to the abandoned hotel by the doll?" Well, there's a creepy thought, hey? This happened when I was a student. I had a part-time job in a restaurant. The restaurant closed each night at 3 a.m. I was living in a student city. By that I mean there was no shortages of students looking for part-time work. I guess you could say I was lucky to have a job. One thing about living in a student city is that when it's Obon, everyone heads home. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Obon, so let me just explain it quickly. Obon is an annual Buddhist event for commemorating one's ancestors. It is believed that each year during Obon, the ancestors' spirits return to this world in order to visit their relatives. Obon is mainly observed from August 13th to the 16th. The Obon week in mid-August is one of Japan's 3 major holiday seasons. Pretty much all of the student workers were eager to either head home and see their families or simply have some time off for the Obon holidays. I was happy to keep working that summer though. I needed the money. The working rota would go like this: 1 full-time worker and 2 part-time workers would work most of the night shifts at the restaurant. And that was the same during Obon. The restaurant was in the middle of a row of houses. It was a renovated property. I mean, the houses were detached and not next to the restaurant. That would have been annoying for the residents if that was the case. The second floor of the restaurant wasn't used for customers. It was used as a storage room where we kept equipment and supplies. There were some odd things up there. I don't know if the stuff up there belonged to the owner of the store, but there were family photos and a Buddhist altar. I never liked going up there at night when I was sent to get supplies. It creeped me out. The following incident happened on the 13th of August last year, the night before Obon officially began, just into the early hours of the actual day, and I'll never forget it. It had been a busy night. I was just about to finish my shift. I left the building to turn off the outdoor lighting in front of the restaurant. There was a motion sensor above the door to the restaurant, so when a customer walked through the door, it made a ping-pong sound that alerted us workers. When I came back inside, I started to clean the floor in the kitchen, hoping that we were done for the night. The other employees were back there in the kitchen with me, and they were cleaning down too. I heard the door sensor go off. I wondered if a customer had just walked through the doors, even though we were about to close. I called out a welcome as a kind of knee-jerk reaction. It was what we had to do every time a customer came through the doors. Shamaseh! I went to look through the doors to see who was coming through them, and I was surprised to see that there was no one there. All the lights at the front of the store were off, and it was 3 a.m. We didn't usually have customers at that time of night. It was odd. The full-time employee came out from the back, and I looked over at him. He said, "Customer?" I walked back towards him and the kitchen and said, "No, actually." I could tell he was thinking the same thoughts as I was. Then why did we hear the entrance chime? We looked at one another in silence for a few moments. Then we heard a loud noise coming from the back of the store. It sounded as if something very heavy had been dropped or slammed. Naturally, the last couple of events had creeped us out. Was someone out there messing with us? We went to look out the back, but there was nothing, and no one out there. I guess that it might have been a stray cat knocking something off of a high place outside the back door. It's happened before. But this was Obon, and my head started to slowly fill itself with legends and ghost stories. The kind of stuff I had heard from a young age. The dead's spirits return for Obon, don't they? The logical part of my brain told me that it was nothing but a coincidence, and to just hurry up and finish my shift. I was thinking a lot of things, I can't remember them all. It's been about a year since this happened. We cleaned down and got everything we needed to do done. Last year, I didn't work Obon, because I went home to see my family. One of the part-time employees said to me something like this happened last year too. I wondered if she was trying to purposely scare me or prank me. We were chatting and I felt as if she was about to tell me what happened last year, but she was interrupted by the sound of the sensor under the door. Ping pong. The timing seemed cartoon-like. This couldn't be real. At this time I didn't say welcome. I just looked over to the dark entrance once again. There was no one there. It was actually scary at this point. It was as if something was there, we just couldn't see it. It was almost as if I could feel something staring straight at me, right out of the darkness. I didn't think my colleagues were pranking me anymore. I just wanted to leave, and thankfully I did without any further ghostly goings-on. I worked the night shift a few times after that, and nothing similar ever happened again. Well, the sensor at the entrance did malfunction once, but I feel like what happened to Obon was a bit different. I guess it probably doesn't sound as creepy as it was, but in those moments in the dark with something close by, I was terrified. This happened pretty recently, and because of it, I'll be quitting my job at the end of this month. My current job is to deliver papers to homes in the mountains, basically in the middle of nowhere. It's tough because I start work at midnight in order to get all of my deliveries done. And it doesn't exactly pay well, but it's good to be working, especially when you're young. You have your own money and it's nice, right? Anyway, like I said, I start at midnight and I don't finish until the sun comes up, and sometimes in the darker months, the sun doesn't come up at all. Being out in the mountains alone at night can be pretty spooky, as I'm sure you can imagine. I want to share my recent scary experience with you. It happened this winter. I had gotten used to the rhythm of deliveries by that point. It was around winter time that the newspaper company I worked for was trying to expand their business. This meant that there would be more work for me. I was excited to earn a bit more money, but over time, it became more and more time-consuming. Basically, a subscription would come in, and then it would be down to me to deliver it to the customer. So, I'm usually riding my bike around with a map because signal is a no-go in the mountains. And I don't mean a push bike, by the way. I mean a really low-quality motorbike. Low CCs. The people who buy these subscriptions have the amazing ability to be unfindable. It never felt as if it was straightforward. I had one of those subscription jobs on that winter's night. I knew the address, and I knew it wasn't going to be an easy night. There were few roads through forest areas, and even worse was the fact that some of the roads were very narrow. I could barely ride my bike along them. I set off and rode my bike right up to the point where the narrow roads began. Since it was winter, I figured it would be safer if I just parked up my bike and delivered the subscription on foot. There was a footpath after all. There was a postbox at the end of the customer's drive. It was a short distance from the house. I started down the sloped road towards the postbox, and then I froze in my tracks. I heard the sound of a dog barking. No, not just one dog. It sounded like there were at least two. I thought not much of it and approached the postbox with the subscription in hand. It was still pretty much pitch black out. despite it being early morning. As I approached, I noticed a light go on at the front door. There was an old lady stood outside, under the porch. Seeing her gave me a fright. I thought to myself, wow, someone's super eager for the morning paper and this subscription. I figured that since she was out, I could literally put the subscription in her hand, so I approached her. I stopped when she started yelling at me. "Stop right there! What do you think you're doing?" "I'm delivering the newspaper." "And your subscription?" "The boss made us wear a uniform and we have to wear this ID card around our neck, as some customers, especially ones like this, who live in remote areas, can be skeptic of people they don't know. You know, stranger danger and all that." I raised my ID badge, as I assumed she could see me pretty well. "You expect me to believe that? You think that's proof?" She screamed at me. I could see the dogs, especially the whites of their teeth. They bared them at me while they snarled. The old woman then pulled out a pair of long gardening shears or scissors from behind her back and pointed them at me. I instinctively backed away. I just tried to remain as calm as possible. I was wondering if she was suffering with some kind of disease, maybe something like dementia. If she came at me with those long scissors, I planned on pushing them away or trying to kick her in the abdomen. I practiced full contact karate. However, she was an old lady. I don't know if I could have done that to her, and I hoped that it wouldn't come to that. I just said, "Well then, I'll just leave this here and be on my way," and with that I turned to leave. I didn't get paid enough to deal with this rubbish. I upped my pace as the old lady was still shouting at me. She sounded as if she was getting really riled up. The dogs were really barking at me now. I turned to look over my shoulder and I saw her let go of their leashes. She was walking towards me, slashing the air with her scissors. She wasn't making any sense. I couldn't make out a single word that she was shouting at me. And it was time to run now. I raced up the hill as I heard the dogs chasing me. I couldn't believe it. She literally released the hounds on me. I ran up the hill as fast as I could. I needed to get back to my motorbike. I got back to my bike, kicked out the stand and hopped on. I started the engine and had a quick look behind me, and I saw the tips of the dogs' heads coming up the slope, and then I pulled away without looking back again. It was really scary, to be honest. I think myself incredibly lucky to get out of there without any injuries. I mean, it would be a different story if I had a push bike. Those dogs wanted to bite me, I could tell. The old woman looked as if she would have joined in too. I imagined her plunging those large gardening scissors into my gut. I shudder at the thought now. After I delivered all my newspapers and my subscriptions, I spoke with my boss and told him about my close call. He decided that he would make contact with the customer to see what was going on, and I could already imagine him taking the side of the customer. It was just the kind of guy he was. However, he found out that the customer's phone number was no longer in use, so he decided to go out there himself and speak to the customer in person. I told him to watch out for the dogs. He said that he would let me know how it went when I came back to work next. I spoke to him the next day and he told me he went out there to meet the customer, but he found nothing but an abandoned house. He then made contact with the subscription company to find out why someone would want to send a subscription to an empty house. It was at this point we learned that the subscription company had fudged the numbers to make our company take their business. They wanted it to look like they had more customers than they did. They had a quota to fill, so they gave out a couple of addresses of abandoned homes. That's stupid. Who the hell was that woman with the dogs then? I have no idea, but when I think back to it now, how hate-filled her face was, it just gives me the shivers, hence my resignation from the newspaper job. Anyway, I'm working till the end of the month, so I hope I don't get sent anywhere near the scissor woman's house. I only have a couple of days of work left, it'll be fine. Hi, there's a note from me, Jay. There were no other posts by this author. Back when I was a student at college, I used to work part-time. I picked up a night shift at a local bar, and I really enjoyed working there. On the night that this took place, an older gentleman was already drinking in the bar when I came in to start my night shift. As soon as he saw me, stood behind the counter, he got up from his seat and came over to the bar with a smile on his face. When he approached the bar, he struck up a conversation with me. I knew him. He was a regular. A very quiet regular, but a very nice one. We had spoken before, and he was alright in my books. Now, I have to say that the content from here on in is incoherent. If you don't understand what the guy said, then you'll be feeling the same as I did at the time. The old man approached and said the following. "From now on, it's China's time. You'll see to whatever's left, won't you?" He reached out his hands, both of them, and I in return offered my hands out to him. We joined hands in a strange kind of double handshake. He was smiling so much it was hard to refuse. To be honest, I really don't like hand touching. I don't know why, but it makes me feel all clammy. I let him though because he seemed to be enjoying himself, and that's what my manager always says. He would say, "If they go home smiling, then you've done your job." The old man had a big smile on his face, and it looked like he had probably bought a couple of drinks, so for the sake of my job, I endured it. He had a nice smile. It was serene. I smiled along, and just thought to myself, "Oh great, this guy's drunk." I glanced over at the table he had come from and noticed something. He had a beer there, and some kind of side snack dish. That wasn't unusual, to be honest. What was slightly unusual was the fact that they looked untouched. I guess that he wasn't that hungry. To be honest, I couldn't care less because I was just starting my shift. Shortly after we spoke, the old man headed out the door, and I thought nothing more of it. In the early hours of the morning, my manager at the bar received a call. The police were calling. There was a body, and there were questions. The old man had been found dead. The old man had been found lying in the street near an intersection just up from our bar. Apparently, he was found quite quickly and taken to the hospital. Unfortunately, there wasn't much they could do for him. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. Apparently, his death was somewhat suspicious, and that's why my manager was being contacted. It was evident that the man had been struck on the head by something or someone. The old man had receipts in his wallet from our bar, and naturally the police thought that our place would be a good starting point to begin their inquiry. The officer asked the manager if he had noticed anything strange about the old man's demeanor, or if he acted differently. The manager answered no. I guess he didn't pay the old man much attention or didn't speak to him all that much that night. It transpires that the old man had suffered a head injury before he came to the bar. He then interacted with us and collapsed after he left. So was that why you were behaving so strangely? I wondered. So when the old man said, "You'll see to whatever's left, won't you?" Did that mean something? The way he smiled, that's what will always stay with me. Did he know? Did he know that he was going to die? Was it predestined? Maybe he knew based on his head injury and there wasn't much time left for him. Maybe he knew based on his head injury that there wasn't that much time left for him. Maybe he wanted to go to the place that made him happy. Hey, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but those words he said will always stay with me. We were able to notify his next of kin. It was a really good thing we were asked, because he was sort of an enigma in town, and apparently not that many people knew him. Hopefully I succeeded with his request in that respect. We toasted his memory on the following night shift. And that was that. This is my sister's friend's story. I found it pretty creepy, so I figured you guys would too. My sister works as a nurse. When she was a student, she was sent to various hospitals to work with nurses. This was the same for all of her other student friends. My sister heard this story when she met up with one of her close friends. She said that even though they were sat in a warm coffee shop when she heard this story, she had chills race up her spine. So the hospital that my sister's close friend worked at was in a rural location. It wasn't your typical busy hospital. It didn't have that many patients. She was working the night shift on the night that this took place. She was doing her rounds, checking on the patients, the usual. There were only a few patients on her ward. They say those long, dark hospital hallways can be quite eerie in the dead of night. However, my sister and her friend tell me that you get used to that kind of thing after a while. I don't know if I could. I'm a bit of a scaredy cat. After doing her rounds, she headed back to the nurse's station to see how her colleagues on the night shift were doing. She was there updating some paperwork and chatting when she heard an alert. When a nurse call button is pressed, it sends an alert to the nurse's station. A patient needed some attention. There was one problem though. The room in which the nurse call came from was vacant. That room had been empty since a patient passed away in it last week. "Is this a prank?" one of her colleagues asked. "Well, someone pressed the call button, so I guess I better check it," she replied. She was a little scared, but since she was the student nurse, she thought she would show initiative rather than be told to do it. She was the youngest and got bossed around the most. So off she went to investigate the call from the empty room. Her heart was pounding in her chest as she walked down the hallway. She had always been terrified by the thought of the paranormal. She went down to the corner room in which the call came from and opened the door. She stepped inside of the dark, unused hospital room. There was no one in there. It was just an empty room. Maybe it's just a malfunction, a ghost in the machine. It was hard to say. She guessed that it could have been a prank too. Maybe some bored patient started scampering around the ward and then quickly ran back to bed. The button could be broken too. It could have been a number of things. She turned to leave the room, put her hand against the door to push it open, but it didn't budge. Locked. It was locked. How on earth? She began to panic. She started beating her hands against the door. All her logical thoughts had gone out of the window now. She was thinking of the paranormal. She knew that the call could only come when a button was pressed. Something called her into that hospital room, and now that same something didn't want her to leave. One of her colleagues came rushing over to the room she was trapped in and opened it from the outside. My sister's friend was an absolute mess. She was completely petrified. She said that she didn't feel alone in that room. Something was hiding in the shadows with her. Hospitals can be pretty scary places when you think about all that goes on in there. I mean, there must be some residual energy trapped in some of the rooms. She requested a transfer to a different hospital after that frightening experience. I wonder what it must have felt like to be trapped in that dark room, unable to get out. Hi everyone, I've added some older night shift stories here to pad out this video for those who like listening to this to help them sleep or relax. If you feel as if you're very familiar with the channel, feel free to skip these ones and maybe check out another video. They are pretty old stories I translated for this channel. You probably won't have found anywhere else, so maybe stick around if you have the time. As always, thanks for listening. This happened to me quite a while ago, but I still remember it as if it was yesterday. I'm a female, and back then I was working in a call center. I used to work the night shift there, occasionally. Due to the fact that the company wasn't a big one, more of a startup, the bosses could only justify one employee working the night shift alone. It was tough. I remember calling my boss regularly because I was unsure of what to do alone at night there. It brought me to the verge of tears sometimes. I remember on occasion crying on the phone to him. After some time, I managed to get to grips with the night shift and my role in the company. It was a couple of months into my employment that the day in question arrived. That night, everything was going smoothly. I was working with a part-timer, and he came over to my desk to let me know he was leaving. During the day shift, the call center is filled with people and it gets noisy, but at night, the call center is deathly quiet and is quite unsettling. All the lights are off except the one section you're working in. The rest of the building is dark. It's incredibly isolating. Sometimes faxes would come through from a customer. I would race over to the fax, grab the paper, then run back to the safety of the light. It always scared me. I was always scared that someone could be hiding behind one of the desks or the machines. It got to about 1 a.m. and I was tidying everything away, relieved that another night shift was finally over. I put the key in the door to unlock it and let myself out when I heard a strange noise. It was the sound of water, like a toilet flushing or something. It came from behind me. I stared towards the toilets behind me. Instantly I thought, it's just a part-time worker. But then I realized after a second or two that he had gone home about 2 hours ago. I tried to calm myself. I thought perhaps that it might have been another employee from another company on the floor below. I knew deep down that there wasn't anyone else in this building working this late though. And I knew that that sound came from the bathroom on my floor. The bathroom which still had the lights out in. I stood there staring at the bathroom's frosted window, thinking about what to do next. Then I remembered something else. That bathroom has a sensor. You have to hover your hand in front of it to activate the flush. That meant that there was definitely someone in there. There was no doubt about it in my mind. I froze on the spot. I didn't want to make a sound. Then I bolted. I didn't want to find out who or what was in the bathroom. I ran downstairs and out of the building, and I made sure I locked the door. A couple of weeks later, I thought that I was overworking myself in the job. So I decided to leave the company. I thought the stress and the late nights might have made me hallucinate that night. My colleagues threw me a leaving party. I heard from one of my colleagues that there were rumors about strange goings-on in the call center. Things being moved at night, other sounds coming from different areas of the call center. They thought they might have a ghost in the building. Some of the employees were saying that they had seen a woman in white in the bathroom. I was skeptical, but interested. A few months later, I heard from the same colleague that the mystery of the call center and the white woman had been solved. Apparently, a homeless woman kept creeping into our building through the vents. The building was quite old, you see. My colleague apprehended her, and she attacked him. She may not have been of sound mind, I'm told. It's pretty creepy knowing that my fears were justified while working alone, that there was actually someone in that bathroom that night. So I'm really glad I got out of there when I did. I work in a nursing home. About a month ago, an elderly woman who had been diagnosed with a mental disorder was introduced to our care home. She seemed perfectly coherent, and we spoke a little. I was surprised by the diagnosis, to be honest. She was really switched on for her age, which was 75. Her responses to questions and her conversation was quite articulate. It got to the point where my colleagues and I were seriously doubting her diagnosis. She was a total joy in her first morning at our care home, I heard as I came into work. I was working the night shift that day. At about 2 a.m., the nurse call button was pressed. I went in to check on her, and she simply said, "I pressed that by accident, I'm sorry." I told her not to worry, and I thought nothing of it. I went to attend my chores down the hall. Not 10 seconds had passed when the call light appeared again from her room. Another nurse responded to her call. I remained in earshot for a moment. I was in the corridor, and her door was closed. Because it was so late and there was no other noise in the home, I could hear every word they were saying. My colleague asked for the reason why. She rang the nurse bell. The lady asked, "That man before," she said. My colleague said, "Oh yeah? What about him?" "He frightens me. He has 2 faces, you know. He really frightens me," the old lady replied. "Oh," my colleague said. "She has a beautiful face, but don't let her trick you. She wants to kill you. If you look in her eyes, she'll eat you." "But he's a male member of staff, perhaps." "Can't you see her? She stood right there," the lady shouted. It was quite alarming to hear the lady, which had been so pleasant until now, shouting in the dead of night. It felt totally out of character. She sounded completely exacerbated too. I knew that there were no windows or doors that anyone could be peering in at her through, since we don't have windows in our bedroom facilities, and the only door was the one I had entered earlier. Since my colleague wasn't aware that I had been eavesdropping, she came out of the room, saw me, and stepped back in shock. I said nothing and I just carried on walking down the hall. It got to about 3 a.m. and it was time for my break to sleep for a couple of hours. I woke up in the morning. That lady was completely back to normal again. When I spoke to her, she seemed to harbor no ill feeling towards me, nor did she seem distressed when she saw me. I didn't think much more of it, and when quitting time came, I went home as usual. However, when I came back to work 2 days later, things had changed. The lady had been pressing the nurse call button every hour since 1 a.m. for the last 2 nights, stating that there was someone in the room with her, and she couldn't stand them staring at her. She couldn't sleep. She said that someone was hanging from the ceiling staring at her. She had been so escalated, it had been difficult to calm her down. This had been ongoing for a month. She rings the bell, complains of someone in the room staring at her. Whenever I answer the call, she always says that she rang the bell by mistake. She will then tell the next member of staff that the woman who answered the call was frightening her. I just want to throw it out there. I look nothing like a lady, by the way. I think this lady is frightened of death, and it's manifesting in her everyday life. She is seeing death. I still maintain that she is the most coherent of all our patients in our facility. It's really difficult to believe that she is mentally ill until night falls. Can she truly see something that we can't? And what does that mean for me if she can? I think about these things now and then, but mostly I just pray for her. I pray for the day that she's not tormented by whatever comes to her at night. I'm a nurse who works the night shift. There have been 2 occasions when I've been stalked on my way home, and I'd like to share them with you. This happened when I lived in Chikawa, Tokyo. I was returning home on the last train of the night. It was around 12:30. When you get off the train and exit the subway, there's a convenience store at the top of the stairs. My apartment at the time was about 7 minutes away from this store in a residential area. At that time of night, when you get off the last train, the lights on the convenience store are pretty much the only light source in the area. The roads are pretty empty too. Back to the story. I was climbing up the subway stairs and I noticed a man waiting at the top of the stairs staring at me. He kept widening his eyes as he stared at me. He was shifting around restlessly. At that moment, I knew the guy was weird. I ignored the traffic lights and crossed the road. I decided to quickly walk home, since the situation was a bit creepy. As I was walking, I felt a presence behind me. I looked over my shoulder and noticed that weird guy from the subway was following me, and he was closing the distance between us. Without any hesitation or thought, I instinctively started running. I remember running like crazy. I was so panicked and frightened. There was no one on the streets to help me, no passing cars, and it was so dark. I ran up a path into somebody's private garden, pushed the gate aside, and I hid there. I crept around to the back of the house. It overlooked a road. I saw a taxi passing by, and I saw my chance. The taxi driver must have seen how desperate I was, and slowed down and saved me that night. After this event, I moved into an apartment right in front of a different train station, This area seemed much safer as it had 24-hour taxi ranks, buses, and it was well lit. And it was busy with people, even at night. It was reassuring. I had been living in my new place for about 2 years when something else happened to me. Of course, it took place when I was coming home from my night shift. In those days when I left the hospital to go home, I used to take a quick shortcut through a dark alley. It was there that I am certain that I met the same man again. I quickly headed to the train station. I boarded my train and I saw him again as I sat down. The man was staring at me. He was doing that weird eye-widening thing I saw him do in the subway. He must have followed me onto that train. I had a terrible feeling about this. He kept glancing at me and fidgeting in his seat. The train pulled into my station. I got as close as I could to the doors, and as soon as they opened, I ran as fast as I could. I ran to an exit I knew to be busy. I took off my jacket and tried to blend into the crowds of people. When I found a safe place to hide, I looked over my shoulder. He was there, desperately searching the area. I knew how much danger I was in. Luckily, there was a police box at the west exit of the station. In the following days, I became paranoid that that man might know where I live, or be waiting to ambush me next time I got off at that station. I told the police everything I could about the man. One of the officers seemed to know the man I was speaking of, and described him as perverted. When he said that, shivers went down my spine. There are lots of young nurses in Japan who work late, like I did back then. It's 10 years on, and I still get creeped out thinking about it. As peaceful as Japan is, be careful when walking home at night. This happened when I was working as a part-time cleaner in a hospital. I would clean at about midnight, as there was less patients and doctors around. It was the working hours I was given, so I couldn't really complain. One night, after all my cleaning was done, I had put my equipment away and got in the elevator and headed for the ground floor. At that time, there were no doctors, nurses, or anyone around. It was really quiet. I couldn't hear or see any of the patients. I got in the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor, like always, except this time, despite me pressing the button for the ground floor, the elevator went down to the underground floors. I continued to press the button for the ground floor, but it was no good. The elevator finally stopped at the second basement floor. It was really weird. It had never happened before. I didn't like this floor, especially not at nighttime, because all that was down here was the post-mortem examination rooms and the morgue. Who was calling the elevator down here at this time of night, I wondered. I was the only night shift worker that night. Why would someone be messing with the elevator? Well, I got out of the elevator on this floor and I went to check to see if anyone had wandered down here. Then, behind me, I heard the jolting sound of the elevator doors closing, which shocked me. The elevator started heading back up. Now I was down there alone. It was going non-stop to the highest floor in the building. I couldn't understand why, as there was nothing but a storeroom and a door which accesses the roof up there. It was off limits to the patients, and only the cleaning staff like me had any business going up there. I called the elevator back to the floor I was on. It finally arrived, and the doors opened. There was no one in the elevator, but there was something wrong. I got in, and I smelled something terrible. The elevator stank of copper. I recognized that smell, and it was the smell of blood. It was inside the elevator, yet the elevator was clean. I couldn't bear being in that elevator. I had to get out and use the stairs on the floor above. I entered the stairwell, and I was certain that someone was watching me. It felt as if someone was right behind me. I ran as fast as I could up those stairs, but I couldn't escape that feeling. I felt for sure that I wasn't alone, but every time I looked back, I realized I was the only one on those stairs. I finished my shift and felt creeped out on the long walk home, but Once I was home, I felt a little better. I had work the next day, and I was a little apprehensive. I saw some of my work colleagues, and they were asking me if I heard the news about last night. I said I didn't know, and asked what had happened. They said that someone had taken the elevator to the top floor and jumped. They said that the body was admitted to the morgue that night. Last night. It was shocking to hear that. I didn't really believe in anything paranormal, so I didn't make the connection to what happened the night before. I just got on with my work. The next day was a day off for me, and I invited a friend over for a few drinks. He's a pretty strange guy to some, I guess. He claims to have the second sight, the ability to sense the presence of the dead. I thought that he might get a kick out of my little mysterious experience, so I told him what had happened. He listened carefully, but began to fidget. I figured he just needed the toilet, so I ignored him. Then he suddenly shot to his feet, saying, "I'm leaving." I asked him what the problem was. I said I had loads more booze, and I needed his help to drink it all. He couldn't be convinced to stay, though. I was annoyed at him, and instead of staying up and drinking alone, I decided to go to bed. I had a terrible nightmare that night. I was being forced into this small and confined area. Cold steel metal was all around me, and it was just so horrible. The next day I asked my friend what the problem was and why he left so abruptly. Get this, it gets really weird from here on, just letting you know. He said that while I was talking, for some reason he looked over towards my door and saw a woman peering at us through the gap in the letterbox. The mail slot. Well, we all know that there is no way someone can fit their head through a mail slot, right? Well, you'd have to have a really flat or mashed up head, I guess. That thought lingered in my mind and made me feel quite sick. I didn't like looking at the mail slot after that. Could that poor person who jumped spirit follow me home from the morgue to my home and watch me through the mail slot? It was just too impossible to believe. I hoped that my friend was just messing with me. It wasn't a funny prank if that was the case, though. Well, I ended up moving away shortly after to get a better job, and things got better after that. It's a weird little tale I wanted to share. Thanks for listening.